Welcome back to the deep dive. We are here to take the most complex stacks of sources, crack them open, and give you the essential, surprising core truths that matter.
And today we are wrestling with a subject that is, well, it's fundamental to life on Earth.
Sunlight.
Sunlight. And it's tangled in so many contradictions.
It really is. I mean, it's the great paradox, isn't it? We're told it's life-giving, our biology is tuned to it, we feel better in it.
But at the same time, every single public health campaign for, the last 40 years has hammered home one message.
That the sun is the primary cause of skin cancer.
And the message has been simple. Avoid.
And what the research you've shared with us proves is that that simple message, it's almost dangerously misleading.
It is. Our relationship with UV radiation is just incredibly nuanced. It's all about these complex biological pathways and, surprising trade-offs.
It sounds like we're talking about a system that relies on, specific wavelengths of light.
Hitting specific depths of the skin at specific times of day, all to achieve entirely separate physiological outcomes.
So trying to lump all sun exposure into just good or bad.
It's like classifying all food as just nutritious or poisonous.
Yeah.
It's absurd. It depends entirely on the dose and, crucially, the pattern.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is pretty ambitious. We need to synthesize a lot of medical and epidemiological research to get past the basic vitamin D story.
Right.
We want to understand the specific variables that make safe sun exposure so hard to quantify.
We really need to dive into the surprising non-vitamin D benefits.
The stuff that affects cardiovascular health, mood.
Yes, and crucially, we have to clarify the distinction between the truly dangerous pattern of exposure, which is that intermittent, acute, holiday-style exposure.
And the much more complex reality of continuous occupational exposure. We need to know what kind of exposure triggers cancer and what kind. What kind might actually be protective.
It's all about giving you, the listener, the full spectrum of knowledge. We need to understand the molecular language of light.
All right, let's start with the one benefit everyone agrees on, the biological gold standard, vitamin D.
Right.
For the listener who knows the basics, let's go deeper. What actually has to happen on a molecular level for us to turn sunshine into this vital compound?
Okay, so we have to zoom right into the epidermis, the outer layer of your skin. The key player here is UVB radiation.
That's the higher energy, shorter wavelength light, the one that causes sunburn.
Exactly. And deep in the layers of the skin, we have this compound called 7-dihydrocholesterol. You can just think of it as 7-DHC.
And 7-DHC is just sitting there.
It's the raw ingredient just waiting for energy.
And the UVB is that energy source.
Precisely. When 7-DHC absorbs a photon of UVB, the molecule's structure actually changes. It's a process we call photolysis.
And it becomes...
It converts into something called previtamin D3. Now, this form is unstable.
Okay.
So within a few hours, it quickly rearranges itself. It isomerizes into cholecalciferol, and that is vitamin D3.
And that first step is done right there in the skin.
Right there in the skin.
But as our sources point out, D3 is just a precursor. It's not active yet. It still needs to be, quote, activated before it can do its job.
That's right. And this is why we really consider vitamin D to be a fat-soluble vitamin with strong hormonal properties. Its active form acts much more like a hormone.
So to get there, to that active form, it needs a couple of activation switches flipped.
2 distinct hydroxylation steps, to be precise.
So where do those switches get flipped?
Okay, first, the D3 that was made in the skin travels to the liver. There, an enzyme adds what's called a hydroxyl group.
And that converts it into?
Calcidiol, also known as 25-hydroxyvitamin D. This is the main storage and circulating form of vitamin D in your blood.
Ah, so when a doctor checks your vitamin D levels, this is the stuff they're actually measuring.
This is what they're measuring, but it's still not the final, fully active form.
And that final step happens where?
Primarily in the kidney. The calcidiol travels there, and it's hydroxylated a second time. It becomes calcitriol.
1025-dihydroxyvitamin D.
That's the one. This is the final active hormone, and its main job is absolutely critical.
Regulating calcium and phosphate?
Which is essential for bone mineralization, bone growth.
Yep.
The whole system. If you don't flip that final switch in the kidney, the whole process just stalls out no matter how much D3 you made in the sun.
Wow. So it's a 3-organ process: skin, liver, kidney. Failure at any stage means you can't regulate your bones properly.
Exactly.
That complexity alone tells you that getting enough D is never a simple equation. You can't just say, go outside for 10 minutes.
The math changes for absolutely everyone. The variability is staggering.
Which is why those universal recommendations are so difficult.
Well, based on the sources, we can really isolate 6 primary variables that dictate how much UVB actually gets to the 7-DHC in your skin and how well that process works.
Okay, lay those out for us.
They are skin pigmentation, your general age, geographic latitude, the time of day, the season of the year, and very practically the amount of your body that's actually exposed, your clothing.
Right. We can kind of intuitively grasp latitude and season. I mean, sunlight is stronger in the summer, closer to the equator.
Sure.
But let's focus on the biological factors. Skin pigmentation and age. Why are they so dominant?
Well, think of melanin, which creates your skin pigment as a kind of natural built-in sunscreen.
Okay.
Melanin sits in the upper layers of the skin, and its job is to absorb UVB radiation before it can get deeper down and cause damage.
But the 7-DHC is deeper down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So darker skin, which has higher concentrations of melanin, means that the UVB is absorbed before it can reach the 7-DHC.
Which means you need much longer in the sun to make the same amount of vitamin D.
Significantly longer. It's an evolutionary trade-off. Protection against UV damage versus slower D production.
And what about the age factor?
As we age, a couple of things happen. First, the actual concentration of that raw ingredient, the 7-dehydrocholesterol, in our skin decreases.
So there's less fuel in the tank to start with.
And second, the efficiency of the skin's conversion machinery it drops. Studies show that an elderly person needs significantly longer exposure or much more intense UV to produce the same amount of D3 as a younger person.
Which helps explain why deficiency is so common in older populations, even if they live in sunny places.
It's a huge contributing factor.
So to make this variability really concrete, let's get into the specific data nuggets you pulled from the research.
Yes.
Because they really drive home how nearly impossible it is to rely on the sun alone unless you're in the right place at the right time wearing the right clothes.
Right. Let's start with this study in Valencia, Spain.
Okay.
Valencia is a great baseline. It's at 39 degrees north, so it shares a latitude with places like Kansas City, Missouri.
So pretty middle of the road.
Exactly.
Mm.
Researchers looked at lighter-skinned individuals, and they standardized the goal. The time needed to produce 1,000 international units, or IU, of vitamin D.
And the seasonal swing was dramatic.
It was huge. So in spring and summer, at high noon, if a person exposed about 25% of their body.
So face, hands, arms, maybe lower legs.
Right, like shorts and a T-shirt. They needed only 8 to 10 minutes of direct sun.
That sounds completely achievable. Trivial, even.
It does. But then the seasonal factor and the clothing factor kick in.
So what happens in winter in Valencia?
The efficiency just plummets. In the winter, even at noon, the angle of the sun and the reduced UVB intensity means the time required just skyrockets.
And people are wearing more clothes.
Of course. So if they only exposed, say, 10% of their body, just their face and hands, they needed nearly 2 hours of continuous midday sun to hit that same 1,000 IU target.
2 hours? That is an exponential jump. That one fact just refutes the casual advice that, a quick walk outside in the winter will top you up.
It makes it functionally impossible for a lot of people in mid-latitudes.
Okay, now let's look at the geographic extremes to really drive this home. The data comparing Miami and Boston.
A great comparison. So, Miami, summer, high sun. For a person with relatively light skin who tans but could still burn,
Right.
with 25% of their body exposed, they needed a mere 3 minutes to synthesize sufficient D.
3 minutes, that's how powerful the UVB is down there.
It's incredibly efficient.
Now let's contrast that with Boston in the deep, cold winter.
So the calculations show that in Boston, in winter, that same person would need 23 minutes at noon if they could somehow expose 25% of their body.
Which is completely unrealistic.
It's not the real world. In Boston, in January, you're bundled up. Maybe 5% of your skin is visible, a sliver of your face.
So we have to adjust that 23 minutes for the tiny amount of skin that's actually exposed.
Exactly. To compensate for only 5% body exposure, that 23-minute requirement stretches to well over 2 hours of standing outside at noon.
And if that person has darker skin,
It stretches even further. The bottom line is that relying on the sun for D is basically impossible for anyone living outside the tropics or who wears normal clothes in the winter.
this overwhelming data brings us right to the sunscreen conundrum.
Yes.
Sunscreen is our primary defense against cancer, but we just established the margin for desynthesis is already razor thin in so many places. How much does it interfere?
It absolutely decreases D3 formation. I mean, it's designed to. UVB is what you need for D3, and that's precisely what SPF blocks.
And the degree of interference depends on a few things.
It really does.
Yeah.
The SPF level itself, the thickness of the layer you apply, and most people use way, way less than required, and of course the total body area you've covered.
So if I apply SPF 30 perfectly, am I getting 0D?
If you apply it perfectly, which almost no one does, SPF 30 blocks about 97% of UVB. So very little is getting through.
But there's a crucial nuance here, a reassuring part.
There is, and that's that vitamin D3 is fat-soluble. It's stored in your fat cells in your liver for months.
So it provides a buffer.
A huge buffer. You don't need optimal sun exposure every single day. The D3 you produce during a sunny summer can sustain you for weeks, even months, through the low sun days of winter.
That storage capacity is a key mitigating factor. It means we should probably prioritize risk management over worrying about daily D synthesis.
And that is the medical consensus. The American Academy of Dermatology, the AAD, their recommendations are all about cancer risk management.
And they strongly advise what?
They advise obtaining your vitamin D from your diet of fortified foods, fatty fish, and/or supplements, rather than relying on unprotected sun exposure.
Because supplements are just a more controlled, predictable, and frankly, safer way to maintain your levels.
Exactly, given the risk associated with that intermittent exposure pattern.
But if people still choose to maximize natural production, what's that optimal Goldilocks zone of exposure?
The general range is typically defined as about 5 to 30 minutes a day, most days a week, exposing a decent portion of skin, and this is key without sunscreen.
And even a low SPF can block it.
Interestingly, yes, sunscreens with an SPF as low as 8 might still block synthesis, because even a small amount of interference can derail the whole process.
Okay, what about the other side of the coin? Toxicity. Can your body overdo it and get vitamin D intoxication just from the sun?
Generally, no. The body is remarkably good at self-regulating D production from the sun.
How does it do that?
Well, once you've synthesized enough D3, the body has feedback loops. It starts breaking down the raw ingredient, the 7-DHC, before it can be converted, or it shunts the pre-vitamin D into inactive byproducts.
So while more sun equals more cancer risk, it doesn't equal more D toxicity risk.
For the most part, no. The risk of vitamin D intoxication from the sun itself is minimal.
Where the toxicity risk really explodes, though, is with supplements.
Absolutely. The tolerable upper intake level, or UL, for healthy adults is set at 4,000 IU per day.
And going way over that can cause serious problems.
Very serious. Consuming excessive doses of vitamin D supplements leads to a condition called vitamin D intoxication, and this primarily causes hypercalcemia.
Which is abnormally high calcium in the blood.
Yes, and the dangers of chronic hypercalcemia are significant. It can lead to the calcification of soft tissues, which means kidney stones, kidney failure, even hardening of the arteries.
And there might even be a paradoxical cancer risk with super high doses.
There's some debate, but some studies suggest excessive synthetic doses might increase the risk of certain cancers, like prostate cancer. The bottom line is just to be prudent. If you supplement, do it under guidance, because you're bypassing the body's natural brakes.
Okay, we've thoroughly covered the vitamin D mechanism, a critical but, slow multi-step hormonal process.
Right.
Now let's explore the non-vitamin D benefits. This is the stuff that really redefines the sun's role in our health, starting with the immediate rapid effect on our cardiovascular system.
And here's where the distinction between the light wavelengths becomes absolutely paramount.
This benefit is mediated by UVA, not UVB.
Exactly. And the molecule is nitric oxide, or NO.
Wait, I need to stop you there. We just defined UVA as the aging ray.
We did.
It penetrates deep, it causes free radicals, passes through glass. I mean, this is generally painted as the most damaging ray. How is it suddenly a benefit?
It is a perfect example of biological dual use. UVA penetrates much deeper into the dermis than UVB does. It doesn't trigger the vitamin D cascade at all.
But it does something else.
It activates a rapid, non-enzymatic process that produces nitric oxide. The skin is basically using UVA light as a signal to release this compound.
And what makes nitric oxide so important for cardiovascular health?
NO is a gaseous free radical, and in this context, it is one of the body's most potent vasodilators.
Meaning it relaxes and widens blood vessels.
Exactly. And in clinical studies, when healthy volunteers are irradiated with UVA, it has been repeatedly shown to result in a sustained, acute reduction in systemic blood pressure.
A sustained reduction in blood pressure from light exposure, that is huge.
It is.
And you said this is rapid, so it happens immediately, not like the hours or days it takes to make active vitamin D.
Precisely. We're talking about two completely different timescales and mechanisms. The D effect is slow and hormonal. The nitroxide effect is rapid, immediate, and vascular. It's a direct biophysical response to the light.
And this process relies on a massive reserve system in the skin itself, doesn't it?
It does. This is a truly fascinating detail. The skin's epidermis contains this huge strategic reservoir of nitrite, or NO2.
And that's the precursor that UVA light mobilizes to create the nitric oxide.
Yes. And researchers have quantified this. The epidermal reservoir of nitrite is around 135 micromoles.
And how does that compare to what's just floating around in our bloodstream?
Well, the total amount in your circulating blood rarely exceeds 13 to 15 micromoles.
Wow. So the skin holds roughly 10 times the concentration of the raw material compared to the blood.
That is not an accident. That's an intentional, massive reserve.
It suggests the body is optimized to use the skin as a large-scale nitric oxide factory.
It confirms the idea. Mobilizing just a fraction of that pool with UVA light is enough to transiently increase plasma nitrite, which provides these acute cardioprotective and anti-hypertensive effects.
So this pathway is one of the most compelling arguments for sunlight having benefits completely independent of vitamin D.
I think it is.
But if this effect is so immediate and powerful that UVA light can acutely lower blood pressure, why isn't this used as a standard treatment for, say, mild hypertension?
That is the critical question.
Yeah.
And the limitation is the obvious trade-off.
UVA is still a carcinogen.
It is still a damaging wavelength.
Ah.
While it doesn't cause that immediate burn like UVB, chronic UVA exposure accelerates skin aging, generates free radicals, and contributes heavily to the risk for melanoma.
So doctors can't ethically prescribe it.
Right. But this research is prompting incredible innovation into finding, say, non-carcinogenic light sources that could mimic the effect and activate that NO pathway safely.
That's the key understanding. The mechanism allows us to potentially isolate the benefit from the risk. Okay. Moving on from the vascular to the psychological. You also sourced research suggesting UV exposure can be powerfully mood-enhancing and even addictive.
Yes, tying into the body's natural opioid system.
This moves us into a pretty deep biological reward system.
It does. I mean, most people report that non-erythemic sun exposure that doesn't burn you is just inherently pleasant.
It boosts energy, reduces tension.
Frequent tanners consistently report feeling more relaxed. And again, this isn't just a psychological preference. There's a strong chemical basis for it.
So what's the chemical signal that links UV light to our mood?
UV radiation stimulates the keratinocytes, which are the main cells in the outer layer of your skin. And these cells produce a precursor polypeptide called POMC.
And POMC gets processed into other things.
It gets cleaved into several bioactive products, one of which is beta-endorphin.
And beta-endorphin is a potent, naturally occurring opioid.
Absolutely. It's the body's own natural morphine. This beta-endorphin is released into the bloodstream during UV exposure, and it may reach the brain in high enough concentrations to induce mood enhancement, relaxation, a sense of well-being.
It's essentially a tiny built-in opioid high that rewards sun-seeking behavior.
It is.
And that sounds like an addiction mechanism waiting to happen. Does the data confirm that chronic, frequent sun exposure can lead to genuine physical dependence?
It does. This research is particularly compelling. The studies on frequent sunbed users are key here.
What happened when they were studied?
When these individuals were given naltrexone, which is an opioid antagonist, it's used to treat substance dependence.
It blocks the opioid receptors.
Right. They showed two key reactions. First, a reduced preference for continuing to get UV exposure. And second, they often experience actual withdrawal symptoms, like anxiety and tension, when that pathway was blocked.
So the sun is literally activating the same neural pathways involved in substance abuse.
And leading to a recognized behavioral addiction pattern that researchers now call tanning dependence. It's a powerful validation that that feeling of relaxation is chemically driven.
It's the body trying to reinforce a behavior that was historically vital for survival.
But in our modern context of chronic high-dose exposure, it can become maladaptive.
Okay, let's shift gears to therapeutic uses. Sunlight, or heliotherapy, has been used for ages to treat ailments. How does modern phototherapy use UV radiation?
Modern medicine uses it very precisely, mainly for inflammatory and hyperproliferative skin diseases.
Like psoriasis.
Exactly. Narrowband UVB is highly effective for treating psoriasis. It has anti-proliferative effects, slowing that rapid growth of skin cells, and it's also strongly immunosuppressive on the localized inflammation.
And do we also use UVA therapeutically?
Yes, UVA-1 phototherapy, which uses that deeper penetrating UVA light, is effective for conditions like localized scleroderma, which is a hardening of the skin. It's also used for vitiligo and severe cases of atopic dermatitis or eczema.
Finally, let's touch on immunomodulation in systemic diseases, specifically multiple sclerosis, or MS.
Yes.
The data here seems to offer some of the most compelling evidence that UV has protective mechanisms that are completely independent of vitamin D levels.
This is a genuine biological paradox. For a long time, we've observed that incidence rates of MS are generally lower in sunnier lower latitude areas.
And everyone just assumed that was because of vitamin D?
It was the natural assumption. Vitamin D deficiency was seen as the primary risk factor.
But the MS paradox challenges that simple view.
It really does. Studies strongly suggest that UV exposure can suppress MS symptoms and progression independently of the vitamin D pathway. And the most compelling evidence comes from epidemiological data on populations with high melanin levels.
You're talking about the observation regarding African Americans and MS rates.
Correct. The data consistently shows that African Americans have a significantly lower lifetime risk of developing MS compared to Caucasians, especially those of Northern European descent.
And this is true despite the fact that, on average, African Americans in the same latitude often have much lower circulating levels of vitamin D.
Because the higher melanin levels are filtering the UVB.
So lower D levels, but lower disease risk.
Yeah.
That flies in the face of the conventional D deficiency hypothesis.
It does. It forces researchers to look at how UV light directly modulates the immune system.
And what are they finding?
They're looking at how UV exposure changes the function of key immune cells, specifically T cells, which are the primary drivers of the autoimmune attack in MSE. UV might be promoting a shift from pro-inflammatory T cells to regulatory T cells.
So the sun is acting as a genuine systemic immunoregulator, completely separate from vitamin D.
That's the leading hypothesis. It suggests that other compounds induced by UV radiation are more critical for this immunomodulation than the vitamin D pathway itself.
We've established that the sun is this sophisticated biological modulator. It makes hormones, it lowers blood pressure, it calms the immune system.
Right.
But now we have to pivot to the single greatest risk, the reason for all the warnings. Skin cancer, specifically melanoma.
And to really understand the risk, we have to be hyper-specific about the two main types of UV radiation.
UVA, the aging ray, and UVB, the burning ray.
The nuance is all in their energy levels and how deep they penetrate.
So let's just reiterate the specifics of UVA.
UVA has the longest wavelength. It makes up about 95% of the UV radiation that actually reaches the ground. Its energy is lower, but it penetrates much deeper.
Into the dermis.
Yes, and it passes right through window glass. It generates a ton of free radicals, which cause cellular damage, accelerate aging, and contribute to cancer.
And it's insidious because you don't feel the damage.
Exactly. It's thousands of times less likely to cause a burn than UVB.
And UVB, the short high-energy wave.
It's the remaining 5%. It's blocked by standard glass. And its high energy means it causes immediate direct damage to the DNA of the cells in the top layer of your skin, the epidermis.
And that direct DNA damage is what causes the sunburn?
The sunburn, the inflammation, and it's the start of the skin cancer process.
Okay, now let's talk about the body's defense mechanism. Tanning. We need to distinguish between a superficial darkening and a truly photoprotective tan.
Because not all tans are created equal. You might get an immediate pigment darkening from UVA, which happens instantly and fades fast.
That offers no real protection.
Little to none. The only tan that provides a measurable photoprotective effect is what we call delayed tanning, or DT.
And that comes from UVB exposure.
Yes. This is the tan that develops slowly, over 2 to 3 days. It's the body actually creating new melanin as a protective shield to physically block UV penetration.
And how protective is it really?
Researchers quantify it as providing an SPF equivalent of only about 2 to 3. So it's better than nothing, but it's a minimal defense.
Okay, now we arrive at the core epidemiological finding that really challenges everything we thought we knew about melanoma risk.
The distinction between intermittent exposure and continuous occupational exposure.
This is probably the most counterintuitive part of this entire deep dive.
It is. The risk profile for melanoma is not simply about your total lifetime sun exposure. It's dictated by the pattern of that exposure.
So let's start with the high-risk pattern.
The high-risk pattern is unequivocally sunburn and intermittent sun exposure.
The classic weekend warrior.
The holiday tourist.
Yeah.
The person who spends all week inside under artificial light and then tries to get a maximal tan in 2 days, resulting in acute, high-intensity exposure and burning.
And that pattern is consistently associated with a dramatically increased risk of melanoma.
Especially on areas that are normally covered by clothing, like the trunk and the limbs.
And the opposite pattern, the one we see in outdoor workers.
The opposite pattern, continuous exposure, shows a remarkably different outcome. Studies consistently find either a null association, meaning no increased risk, or even an inverse association with melanoma risk overall.
An inverse association, meaning a lower risk.
A lower risk.
You sourced the International GM study, which is a major study in this field. What did they find specifically about continuous exposure?
The GM study is one of the largest on melanoma, and its findings were powerful. It confirmed that inverse association. It found a lower risk for high, continuous, weekday sun exposure.
And where on the body was this protective effect strongest?
They found significant inverse associations for melanoma developing on the head and neck and also on the upper limbs in people with high total weekday exposure.
So the people who are out in the sun from 9 to 5 days a week, often have a lower melanoma risk on the most consistently exposed parts of their body.
Compared to the general population, yes.
That just sounds like heresy to the avoid the sun mantra.
It forces us to ask, why? If UV is the carcinogen, why are people getting the highest lifetime doses, sometimes at lower risk?
And the hypothesis is a mechanism called photoadaptation.
Yes, it's a sustained, multi-layered defense response. First, continuous exposure drives the development of that protective delayed tan. Second, it causes the epidermis, the outer skin layer, to physically thicken.
So it creates a thicker physical barrier.
Right, which reduces how much UV can penetrate to the deepest, most vulnerable cells where melanoma often originates.
And the intermittent sun seeker's skin never gets to that state.
Never. That pattern of rapid, intense damage followed by long periods of healing never allows the skin to reach that fully photoadapted, thickened state.
And there's a behavioral component, too.
Potentially. Outdoor workers might eventually adopt better, continuous sun protection habits, hats, long sleeves, whereas casual sun seekers might be actively pursuing the sun to get a tan.
Okay, that covers risk. But the exposure pattern also seems to influence the disease outcome after a diagnosis. Let's talk about that study of Italian melanoma patients.
This was a fascinating study. They looked at nearly 3,000 patients diagnosed with melanoma and tracked their sun habits in the 5 years before their diagnosis.
And the results were striking.
They were. Having holidays with sun exposure in those preceding 5 years was significantly associated with positive prognostic factors.
And what makes a prognosis positive in melanoma?
The most critical indicator is Breslow thickness. That's the vertical depth of the tumor. Thinner melanomas are strongly correlated with better survival because they're less likely to have spread.
And the sun holiday group had thinner tumors.
Significantly lower Breslow thickness and also a lower rate of ulceration, which is another marker for a less aggressive cancer.
So recent sun exposure correlated with a less aggressive form of cancer. Was this true for all types of UV, like tanning beds?
No. This is a vital distinction. Sunbed use and exposure during the peak, most intense hours of 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. were not associated with these favorable prognostic factors.
Only the pattern defined as holidays with sun exposure.
Yeah.
This finding is incredibly counterintuitive. If the sun is the causal agent, why would recent non-peak sun exposure correlate with better outcomes? What are the hypotheses?
Well, the first one goes back to vitamin D. The idea is that recent sun exposure on holiday might boost vitamin D levels, and those higher levels could potentially inhibit tumor progression.
The second hypothesis is more about behavior.
Right, the socioeconomic confounder. People who take sun holidays are often more affluent, more health aware, and more likely to get their skin checked. So they might just be getting diagnosed at an earlier stage when the tumors are still thinner.
And our researchers tried to account for that.
They did. They tried to adjust for it statistically, and the correlation still remains significant.
So what's the third most novel hypothesis?
It's the idea that intense recent sun exposure might actually trigger or promote a less aggressive type of melanoma. We know the incidence of thinner, non-life-threatening melanomas is rising fast, while the rate of the dangerous thick ones is stabilizing.
So this suggests that the sun exposure that results in a diagnosis is often triggering these less aggressive variants.
While the truly fatal melanomas might be driven by entirely different factors, not necessarily recent sun, it's a provocative idea.
The synthesis is clear. The sun is essential, protective, mood-boosting, and yet potentially lethal, all depending on dose and pattern. So the key for the listener is finding that balance. Let's distill the current consensus on practical safety measures.
Okay. We can rely on the core recommendations from the American Academy of Dermatology, which manages risk very rigorously. It's a multi-pronged defense.
Let's start with the chemical defense. Sunscreen. What are the key criteria?
You want a broad spectrum, so it protects against both UVA and UVB water-resistant sunscreen with an SPF of 30 or higher, used daily on all exposed skin.
Why 30 or higher? Is SPF 100 really that much better than 30?
The actual increase in blocked rays is marginal. SPF 30 blocks about 97%, SPF 50 blocks about 98%. None block 100%.
So why the recommendation for higher numbers?
User error. Most people apply only a fraction of the amount needed to get the SPF on the label. A higher SPF helps compensate for that underapplication. It gives you a better real-world level of protection.
And the application details are crucial.
Absolutely. The rule of thumb is about 1 ounce, a shot glass, full for the whole body, at least a teaspoon for the face, neck, and ears.
And you apply it 15 minutes before going out.
And reapply every 2 hours, or immediately after swimming or heavy sweating. And that reapplication step is the one most people just forget.
Beyond the bottle, what are the primary physical defenses?
Physical protection is always superior. First, seek shade, especially during peak UV hours, which are typically 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Second, wear sun protective clothing.
Wide-brimmed hats, long sleeves, sunglasses.
Exactly. And look for clothing with a UPF number.
Right, the ultraviolet protection factor.
A standard cotton t-shirt might only have a UPF of 5, which gets even worse when it's wet. Clothing labeled with UPF 30 or 50 plus guarantees effective measurable blockage. It's far more reliable than just sunscreen.
You also highlighted a specific concern for people with darker skin tones regarding visible light.
This is a critical point that often gets missed. For individuals with darker skin, the visible light from the sun, not just the UV, can trigger and worsen hyperpigmentation like melasma.
So for that, you need a different kind of protection.
The AAD advises using tinted sunscreens that contain iron oxide. The research shows that iron oxide, which provides the tint, is effective at blocking those visible light wavelengths.
That really shows how protection has to be customized. And finally, what's the advice for infants?
Babies under 6 months should be kept out of direct sun entirely. Their skin is just too sensitive. Protection has to be managed through shade, lightweight clothing, and hats.
Okay, now let's pivot back to that population we discussed. Outdoor workers. They face unique challenges.
This is a policy and public health crisis hiding in plain sight. We're talking about nearly 45 million Americans, farmers, roofers, construction workers, military personnel.
And their risk is exponentially higher.
It is. And the economic cost is staggering. We're talking about roughly $100 million in lost worker productivity and over $8 billion in annual medical costs in the U.S. alone for skin cancer.
Is solar exposure regulated as a hazard by, say, OSHA?
Not explicitly or comprehensively. OSHA is rigorous about chemical hazards or heat stress, but solar UV is often just treated as an environmental factor. This leaves the burden of protection almost entirely on the employee.
Which is ineffective.
And dangerous.
So if regulation were to catch up to the science, what does the comprehensive employer safety wish list look like?
It requires a paradigm shift. Employers need to see UV as a legitimate workplace hazard. The recommendations are pretty clear.
What are they?
First, mandatory shade and cooling areas for breaks. Second, flexible scheduling to avoid that 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. peak intensity window.
So starting earlier or finishing later.
And rotating jobs between indoor and outdoor tasks. Third, mandatory hydration breaks. Fourth, and this is key, employers must provide free, broad-spectrum sunscreen, SPF 50 plus fast, and appropriate protective clothing.
Hats with neck shields, long sleeves.
All of it. And finally, they need to monitor and post the UV index daily, with mandatory safety protocols kicking in whenever the index exceeds 3. This can't be optional.
It's clear that for the intermittent sun seeker, managing risk is a personal choice. But for the continuous exposure worker, it's a major policy failure.
It really is.
So we've journeyed through molecular synthesis, cardiovascular effects, opioid addiction, cancer epidemiology. What's the ultimate synthesis?
What do we tell the listener about their relationship with the sun?
The key takeaway has to be that the sun isn't just good or bad, it's complicated. Its impact depends entirely on a complex interplay of dose, wavelength, and pattern continuous versus intermittent.
We're balancing the rapid systemic benefits against the slow-burning DNA damage.
The body is performing this real-time, complicated biological calculation every minute you're under the sun.
It's simultaneously starting the slow hormonal production of vitamin D via UVB, while rapidly lowering blood pressure via UVA and nitric oxide, and possibly initiating a psychological reward loop via endorphins.
And the simple message to just avoid the sun ignores the sophistication of all these parallel systems.
It does.
And as we move forward, trying to fine-tune our relationship with the sun, we're left with this fundamental scientific ambiguity. The sources highlight that it's very difficult or even impossible to definitively separate the benefits from UV radiation itself from the benefits mediated solely by vitamin D.
Which raises an important question for you, the listener, to mull over. We know now that cardiovascular health and mood enhancement can be driven rapidly by UVA-induced nitric oxide, a mechanism that is entirely separate from vitamin D.
So if the sun is regulating our blood pressure and our mood without even touching the vitamin D pathway,
how many other systemic health benefits that we currently attribute only to a vitamin D deficiency are actually due to the complete modern-day lack of exposure to the full, non-toxic UV spectrum itself? Yeah. We might be missing the full picture by focusing on only one hormonal product.
That's a powerful perspective shift. It suggests that maybe the sun isn't just a D delivery system, but a vital environmental signal that manages systemic inflammation, circulation, and mental health.
The pill might be a substitute, but the light itself holds essential codes for our survival.
Thank you for guiding us through this incredibly complex source material.
My pleasure.
That's it for this deep dive. We hope this knowledge helps you navigate your day, whether you're indoors under the fluorescence or outside under the immense complexity of the sun. We'll see you next time.